You'll have to take that thing
I think you.
I guess not.
Because we had that free day on Friday. It wasn't really free, it was just there.
Am I gonna need to go outside?
When we get to the table, I know we should. I know we should. I know we should.
Trying to sleep.
I got two tables. I got to do research project. I haven't done anything. I mean, I've done stuff, but I don't have enough.
Might as well have.
And I haven't done the commentaries.
It is hard. Don't listen.
No, we're starting. Things due Wednesday or Thursday, but he's not grading it until Friday. I think we're starting the layout at
On the video. It's basically.
Yeah, that makes sense because we're starting the write-up. We were starting the writing today because we have the test on Wednesday, and then we have the entire book test is on Friday. Lowry's why? You always gotta work. He just like, he has like a bunch of shit to do and he's still playing Monopoly or whatever. Sure, Mr. Neal's advisory. I will personally go over there and have him pardon you from your. Oh yeah, you're right. Forget he does that. He's your advisory, right? Just left. Who's your?
Is Cole here?
Advisory teacher?
Yeah, it's here.
Oh, okay. He's not in a seat, so I thought he was absent.
That's funny.
Jet's yapping.
What was it, just like the middle of the year? I didn't know this happened.
Cole, you got 5 seconds.
Cole, you got 5
He
seconds.
was here for 2 years.
5 seconds. 5
I
seconds.
remember
Gotta
it
run.
was his first day whenever we were and he was here last year and he was taunting me. And then he left.
All right, guys, I need y'all to go through your binder and find the 2 quizzes that I passed back to you last class.
Oh, yeah.
You probably should also get out your test review. So, the end of last week, I'll remind you that we were able to slow down a little bit. I was able to give you some flexibility about the 3.2 quiz, but that was only because we had one more A day before spring break than B day. And, of course, B day needs to be caught up by then. So, we are kind of back on track here, where today is your official test review day. So, kind of more like first semester. The most important thing to look at and review to prepare for your test is looking at your quizzes. Girls, I need y'all to stop talking, please. Is to look at your quizzes. Anything you miss on your quizzes are 99% chance they're going to be on your test, so you need to get those things cleared up. You can see in just a moment, once I finish the directions here, I will take questions from the 1.9 quiz, which is the least important, then the 3.1 quiz, then I will pass back your 3.2 quiz and take questions from that. And then there was about 10 or 11 questions from the test review that I asked you to do, so I will give you a chance to ask from those as well. But the quizzes would be the best resource to make sure you're prepared for the test. The questions that pertain to this unit or this part of the unit would be the second best resource for the test. There are 2 other reminders that you may want to write down. If you have any late work you haven't turned in yet, or anything you turned in incomplete and got half credit on, remember you can finish those, turn them in before the test, and you can get half of your points back. So if that applies to you, then please add that to your to-do list. Also, I sent out an announcement today in Google Classroom. On Tuesday and Wednesday of this week, they will be using my classroom for ELPA testing. So that doesn't affect you on Tuesday unless you signed up to come see me during advisory. I won't be in here, but it will affect you on Wednesday because we will not be in this classroom. We'll be in Mr. Williams' classroom. He's on first floor of phase 2. I don't remember the room number, but I put it in Google Classroom. So as long as you remember to check Google Classroom before class on Wednesday, you will remember to go there instead of to come to here. So, okay, so 1.9. Again, this would be the least important of the 3 sections for this test. That was more or less trying to be a benefit for you to help you transition into logarithms, specifically the graphing a little bit. But anything from the 1.9 quiz would be fair game for your test. So is there anything from the 1.9 quiz that you would like a refresher on? That was inverse functions, one-to-one, stuff like that. What you got, Naomi?
Were they talking about this half of this math? Just like divided by 2? Just how long it's been?
What was the first part of your question again? Girls, I need y'all to stop talking, please. I can't hear her.
Number 10 was asking about this half math.
I don't have the question 10. I'm only on 1.9 right now.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Can you do number 5?
Number 5. Okay, which form?
On which test?
Yeah, which form do you?
A.
Okay, if you had the other form, if you didn't have Form A, I think we only had 2 forms for this one. You should have looked at question 5 real quick. It's not the exact same problem, but it's a similar skill. So, okay, so I gave us this for a function which is not one-to-one, so they had to restrict the domain so that it would be one-to-one and that it did have an inverse function. So at its core, you have to remember what the difference between a function and its inverse is. It just means you're swapping input with output, so you should have that step. And then before it's the inverse, you really should solve for y. So undo the -4 and undo the square, and that's where you should come up with the inverse. You okay with that? Okay, the second part of the question, this is describing the x values. So this is the restricted domain. His range, pretty much the only way to know the range of a function is to think what its graph looks like. But we gave you one that was easy enough that you could do without a calculator. It's x squared shifted down 4. So his range is -4 to infinity. And the reason why you should think about that is because the domain of the function becomes the range of the inverse. Although I guess it would be y, not x. And the range of the function becomes the domain of the inverse. That's how you should know the second part of the question. The other thing that I suggested you do on the practice quiz, which is completely optional, but you could have graphed this. You could have kept just where x is greater than or equal to 0, not the other part. And then once you thought you knew what the inverse was, if you're willing to graph it also, then this makes this part of the question a little bit easier. You can see the domain is -4 to infinity. And if you graph both of those, you should feel a little more confident because there's this line of symmetry at y equals x. So that would be the benefit of doing that extra work. Okay, did anybody else have a question about 5 while it's still up there? Okay, others from 1.9? You do need to tell me the form if you have one or two. Okay, so again, anything on 1.9 is fair game, but honestly, I would anticipate your test will be about half from 3.1 and about half from 3.2. Again, we really spend a couple days on 1.9 for your benefit, not because we're necessarily that interested in it right now. Okay, so for 3.1, everybody in here has taken this one as well. So 3.1 was about exponential functions, so identifying the difference between exponential growth and decay without a calculator. All of this was without a calculator. Graphing an exponential function, describing the graphs, transformation rules, a couple applications like half-life and compound interest, and the horizontal asymptote type questions on 15-16. So you need to figure out what, if anything, from 3.1 you would like to review on. And you need to tell me which form you had. Yeah, on it.
Form B, 15 and 16.
15 and 16. Okay. I think those are the horizontal asymptote questions. So again, if you struggled with 15 and 16 on Form A, it's not the same questions, but you should probably still follow along because you still get similar benefit. Okay, so question 15 looks like this, and this is the one, again, you're welcome to take on your own strategies, but what seems to be the easiest for students is to be ready to either change a number that goes to 0 to 1, or change a number whose exponent keeps getting bigger to a number that just keeps getting bigger, And probably the most important one, because it's the least intuitive, if you have a number and the exponent goes to negative infinity, that's the same thing as 1 over the number going to positive infinity, which is like 1 over infinity. And anytime you have a fraction where the numerator is stuck still, but the denominator keeps growing, that fraction approaches 0. So for question 15, I would memorize these three and be ready to use them. And then you have to plug these values in. So if I plug in negative infinity, it's going to look like this. And then just try to break it up into a bunch of small pieces. Maybe just try to figure out that part first. I would say positive divided by negative is negative, and 0.9 divided by infinity would head to 0. But 0 is the only number that's the same whether he's positive or negative. This is kind of like -1 times 0, which is still just 0. So now this matches the first thing that I suggest you memorize. A number whose exponent goes to 0 goes to 1, which means the denominator goes to 3, and your whole function goes to -2. You okay with this first part? Okay, the other side of this question, if you plugged in negative infinity, it's going to look like that. I would still try to break it into small chunks. So 0.9 divided by a number that keeps growing goes to 0. But this one is a positive divided by a negative. Oh wait, I need to plug in positive this time. Positive divided by a positive would be positive. But it ends up being the same thing. This still goes to 1. So the denominator goes to 3 and the fraction goes to -2. So question 15 was an example where it could go to the same number on the left and the right. Whereas question 16, actually if you had the other form, these might just be switched. I think this might have been your question 16, is that right?
No, that was my question.
No, for you, yeah, but I meant the other form. I think the other form, this might have been 16 and 16 might have been 15. So, okay, so if I plug in negative infinity the first time, it's going to look like that. Right here, positive times a negative is negative. That's important to keep up with. It ended up being lucky where if I didn't think about that, I still got those two right. But if you don't do it here, it's going to be wrong. Positive divided by negative, positive times a negative is negative. 0.4 times a number that keeps growing is just going to keep growing. And it's not that you can't reason through what this is, but it's a lot quicker to have that one memorized. That's the third one I suggested, which means the denominator is going to 2 and your whole fraction is going to 5. If you plug in positive infinity instead, now you've got a positive times a positive, which would be positive. 0.4 times a number that keeps growing will just keep growing. Now, this doesn't go to 0 like this did. This was a number to the negative infinity, which is why it goes to 0. A number that goes to positive infinity is just going to keep growing, which means your denominator is going to keep growing, which means your fraction is going to head to 0. Okay, did you have something more specific on any of those? Okay. All right, anybody else that was going to ask those, need any of that repeated or in more detail? Again, I realize that's probably one of the things that you did not see at all in Algebra 2, but it is one of the things. Actually, last period, my calculus class just took a test, and one of their last questions If my other class hadn't taken it yet, I'd show you what it was, but basically they had to do this to get the last question right. And that's not something we have reviewed in calculus. It's something that they're expected to know. So, similar skill though. Okay, what else from 3.1? Again, if I was you, I would anticipate about half of your test to come from 3.1. Okay, Naomi?
Can you do B on number 10 for Form B?
10, Form B. So that is the half-life question? Okay. Okay, so they give us this. That's supposed to measure how many grams are left of plutonium. Plutonium. There we go. And the two questions we asked is how much did it start off with, which would be when T is 0. So you really should have just plugged in 0 for T and then solved this. You don't need to know any special tricks. 0 divided by 12 would be 0. Anything to the 0 power is 1. So your answer came from 100 times 1. That's part A. When T was 0, just solve for Q. Also, the answer is right there in the equation, but I don't want you to memorize it that way, just in case you mix it up. The other part of the question is how many years does it take for it to reach half of its mass? So if he started off with 100, he's going to reach half when he gets to 50. And to solve an exponential equation like this, normally you need logarithms, but we hadn't done logarithms at this point. So this question has been rigged where we can do it without logarithms. So for this one, you could divide both sides by 100, and that gives you 1/2 on the left and 1/2 to the T over 12 on the right. Well, what's the exponent on this? 1. So for these two things to be equal, you just need to make sure that the exponents are equal. So T over 12 equals 1 when you're at 12. So at 12 years, your 100 grams has reached half as much. It's gone down to 50, which is what half-life is. Hold on. Hello? Hey. He is out for a few days. I think he's just gone on a trip. Okay, thanks. Okay, was that enough there? And those are the only two types of questions we'll ask you about half-life, so you don't have to be an expert on those or anything. Okay, is anybody else? Anybody else got a question about that part?
This is unrelated.
Okay.
I left my binder in my last class. Could I get it?
Take the pass. But don't interrupt their class if they're busy. Okay. Others from 3.1? Okay, I did not pass back your 3.2 quiz last class. But I will pass them back to you today. So as you get yours, you need to start looking at the questions you missed and figuring out which questions you understand why you missed, because I tried to drop some information down there. And you should anticipate this to be approximately half of the test. we start looking that over, know what you want to ask about.
I thought we were doing last
I will also remind you that when we come back from spring break, we have 2 more sections of logarithms. So even though this should be about half of your test, if you don't know log properties and occasionally you don't know log graphs, that can make the next 50-point test, 3.3, 3.4, harder than it should be. All right, same thing. You got to tell me which form you're looking at. And again, I did try to write some stuff on some of your questions, especially if it was a mistake more than once. But I can go over any or all parts of it. We certainly have time to. So just go ahead and tell me what it is as soon as you find one. Yeah.
I have form B. Could you go over number 8?
Number 8. Okay. So number 8 is probably one of my favorite questions for sure on this. And I wish we had like an extra week because there's lots of logarithmic real world type questions like this that is good for you guys to see. Just lots of stuff naturally occurs in a logarithmic type of way, but one of the more classical examples is this thing called the human memory model, which basically amounts to you just forget stuff over time. So like if I asked you guys like what happened yesterday, give me as many details as you remember, you're going to remember a whole lot of stuff about yesterday because it just happened. But then if I ask you about yesterday a week from now, and then a month from now, and a year from now, over time you forget less and less of those details, which is what the human memory model says. And eventually it kind of levels out, kind of like a logarithmic graph. It levels out. And some stuff about yesterday you just basically remember for the rest of your life. Now, this function is not very realistic, but we made up one that you could work out without a calculator. So basically, these students took a test and they're calling that time 0. So how did they do on the test the first time they took it? And then after 9 months have passed, they took the same test again and they tested to see how much of it they remembered. So you should be plugging in 0 for t for the first part. And then again, we kind of had to rig this function to work without a calculator nicely, but this is a real, human memory model is a real thing. So to work this one, you would need to do 0 plus 1 would be 1. What is log base 10 of 1? Log base 10 of 1. 10 to what power gives you 1?
0.
0, because anything to the 0 power is 1. So the first answer came from 80 minus 0, or 80%. So that's how they did on the test originally. And then for the second part, if I come back and change t to be 9, Now 9 plus 1 would be 10. What is log base 10 of 10? 1, because it's the saying 10 to what power gives you 10. So your answer should come from 80 minus 5 or 75%. Which should make sense. It should make sense that you remember less of it after 9 months. I think the real human memory model, I think we tend to remember about 40% from 1 year to the next. Like, you'll remember about 40% of what happened last year, and then the year after that you'll remember 40% of what you did know, and etc. But for this hypothetical, 80 originally and then 75 after 9 months. Okay, is that enough? Okay, others from 3.2. Form B, number 3. She's using it, and she's next on the bathroom. You're gonna have to wait. Okay, it wanted us to graph this. And then answer a bunch of stuff about the questions. All right, so to me, I look at this and I can see I need to shift log base 3 of x left 3 because of this transformation rule. Now, if you guys mix up your transformation rules, that's going to hurt you on 3 and question 5 and question 9. You have to know your transformation rules. So I'm going to take log base 3 of x and shift it left 3. If you don't know what log base 3 of x looks like, although all logarithmic graphs basically look like this, you could start off with 3 to the x and the reason why you might start with that is because he has inverses with log base 3 to the x. So this point, switch x and y, this point, switch x and y. And that's how you can figure out what log base 3 of x looks like. And then if I want to shift it left 3, everything's moving left 3. The x-intercept's going left 3, 1, 2, 3. The x-intercept is now at -2, 0. This point shifted left 3, 1, 2, 3, which ended up being the y-intercept, 0, 1. The vertical asymptote was at x equals 0, but when you shift the graph left 3, now it's at x equals -3. I can see the domain is from -3 to infinity. The range goes forever down and forever up. And the graph is going up over time, so I would say it's increasing. And that's all it asks for. So, you okay with how I got that piece there? Okay. Okay, seems like you guys are slowing down, but again, I don't want to move on too quickly if there's something else I can help with. I would say probably the hardest question to me was number 6C, but y'all did pretty good with that. Just felt like it was the hardest one, but it was only 1 point, so it wasn't too punishing if you got stuck somewhere. But okay, and then last thing is there was about 10 or 11 questions I suggested that you do on the test review. Again, there is a lot of questions on the test review we have not covered yet. A lot of questions on the test review that will not be on Wednesday's test. Our test is Wednesday because that's the last time I see you guys before spring break. It's a big week, so I will see you twice. So that was questions 1 through 9, and I think 11 and 13. So if you really got those things cleared up on the quizzes, you're probably okay with those questions on the test review. but I don't mind going over those, any of those as well. So, anything on the test review 1 through 9 or 11 or 13? Any of those you don't understand or I could help with? Okay, so a couple things to note here, some stuff that you may want to write down. I gave you 2 of these reminders at the start of class. So let me remind you of all that stuff again. You might want to write some of these things down. Our test is Wednesday. It's the last time I see you before spring break. So you guys have a big chunk of time right now to review and study. But of course, it's still going to be beneficial, even if it's just 5 or 10 minutes to look over your notes before the test. So you may want to write that down in your phone or in your planner, whatever your system is, number 1. Number 2, remember that if you have any missing work or incomplete work, you can finish it and turn it in and get half your points back. But I have to have it before we start the test on Wednesday. So if that applies to you, add that to your to-do list. If you're not sure if it applies to you, make sure you figure it out today during class. And finally, we won't be in here on Wednesday. We will be in Mr. Williams' classroom. First floor, phase 2. It's in Google Classroom if you don't know where he's at. So again, you may want to write that down, because if you forget and you come all the way up here and then they just send you all the way back down, you're going to be running across campus. So, and you're going to be running across campus right before you start your test, which is not ideal. So, all right. So you guys still have almost 70 minutes. So unless you feel like you're ready to take the test now, please utilize that time to prepare, whether that's practicing more, studying more, looking over your notes, whatever that is. I do have some extra copies of the quizzes that are not makeup forms. So if you would like some of those, I will leave those out on the front desk. So I've got some extra 1.9s, some extra 3.1s, and some extra 3.2s. I know that was more fun. And if you get any benefit from practicing those, just help yourself. I will take them off the table here in about 20 minutes. So grab them before then if you need them. But that's the last thing I've got for you. So just make sure that you're ready. Make sure you're using your time well. And that way, if you guys do need some help, I'm here. And feel free to bring it up and ask me what you need to ask.